You guys, it's Andy from the iReview Tech, and for this week's video is about the iPhone 13 in filmmaking. There are many features that I want to talk about from a filmmaker's perspective. This year, even though the outside of the iPhone looks pretty much the same, there's a lot of new stuff in those cameras. All of the iPhone models have new lens systems, and behind those lenses are brand new, much bigger sensors. Also, they stabilize the sensors instead of just having lens stabilization. Plus, there's bigger batteries and new software features like ProRes support and, of course, cinematic mode, which we will definitely cover here. Let's go over the updates a bit. It's a bit easier to explain this here because now there's only two different camera systems if you get the iPhone 13 mini or the regular 13. You've got a new wide lens and an updated ultra-wide in the iPhone 13 Pro and the 13 Pro Max. You've got that same wide-angle lens, a much further updated ultra-wide. It's a lot better, and then also a 3x zoom telephoto that is also new now. The most important lens is always that wide angle because it's kind of what we use all the time, and it just has the highest quality. The sensor has gotten 47% bigger, which means a lot more light when you're doing photography. There's some computational things that help you out if you don't have a lot of light, like deep fusion and night mode, but you can't do that with video. It's more reliant on what the sensor is actually giving you, so that larger sensor and also the faster aperture, which now the wide angle is 1.5, gives you better results in even relatively low light like medium sunset or indoors. There is a visible difference on the 13 Pro and Pro Max, where that ultra-wide is now a lot faster. It's made a massive leap from 2.4 to 1.6. That's a really big jump, and it means that it's not gonna look so bad as soon as the light goes down. It's much more used, but also has autofocus now, which wasn't even available on the previous ultra-wide. It was fixed focus, so this is what enables macro photography on that lens as well. The Pro models also have a new telephoto lens that is 3 times equivalent to 77mm. That's a lot, not a super fast f-stop. It's like 2.8, which means low light isn't great on that longer lens, but the zoom is very far. And then of course the headline feature across all of the 13 models is cinematic mode. I think maybe one of the biggest letdowns with cinematic mode is the fact that it only shoots in 30 frames per second. Most filmmakers for cinema are shooting in 24 frames per second. Cinematic mode seems like a big mess. Apple knows that people shooting 24 doesn't seem technically any harder. I wish it did. That cinematic mode is limited to 1080 and 30 frames per second now. The 1080 I don't think is a big deal at all because in 4K this couldn't really hold up anyway. I think the 30p, that is a mistake. I'm not really sure why that happened because Apple definitely knows that most filmmakers usually shoot in 24 or 25 frames per second, and 30 looks a bit less cinematic, so it won't match up with videos usually shot. What Apple really nailed in this quality though is the bokeh does look pretty real. Like a real lens. One thing I'm realizing really quickly is that the depth of field from cinematic mode gets way too blurry in a closer up shot. Another downside of adding this new feature is that the default camera app is getting pretty bloated, and it is hard to navigate sometimes once you've tapped a few levels deep to find a setting. You can feel kind of trapped, and it can take a second to navigate back out. There's just a lot going on here now after you've shot in cinematic mode. A really cool feature is that you can update in post on any of the videos, and then afterwards you can select which subject is in focus at which time, and these have keyframes throughout the video, so there's little markers at the bottom end. You can actually feel as you're scrubbing through when the focus is jumping using the haptic feedback, or you can just lock focus in one place for the whole video, which sometimes is the best thing to do so if while you're shooting you feel like that focus racking doesn't look realistic. To go in afterwards, do some modifications in post, and it can look quite a bit better. Apple also says you're gonna be able to do this with Final Cut Pro and iMovie, but I didn't see those updates while I was making this video, so I'm gonna have to get back to you later on how well those work. But overall I am surprised how good cinematic mode looks like while you're shooting. You feel like you're making a movie again on a bigger screen. The cutouts, they're still not perfect. I hope we see revisions in the future so that it really can be used in a more professional context, but for now it's really fun, and it's going to be especially fun on social media. Every year I feel like I need to explain the relationship between iPhones and professionals, and I always say, like most pros use an iPhone, professional photographers, filmmakers, they choose Apple phones, but that's not the main reason. We also have social media, and we post stories and reels and all that stuff, and we want it to look as cinematic as our professional work as often as possible. Another new feature is the ability to focus extremely close to your subject using the macro capabilities of the ultra-wide lens. I tested this out briefly, but I'll go more in depth in the photography video. So that is a great reason for you to subscribe if you haven't already. Just like last year, the iPhone 13 still records in Dolby Vision, and it does its own HDR mastering, which is very impressive and looks great if you're just recording stuff and watching it on the iPhone. I find that since I edit things afterwards in Final Cut Pro, it's easier to keep everything in standard definition, so I'm still not using that HDR feature very often. It looks cool, but it can be a little more complicated if you're doing professional video use. Another pro feature is ProRes, which if you edit videos you probably already know is one of the most common recording formats. The advantage here isn't exactly image quality, it's more that this codec is very easy for any computer, especially Mac, to work with, so it doesn't have to decompress the file. It can just really quickly edit fast. I mean, all video editors are used to Pro as files. The files are going to be huge, which is to be Expected with ProRes about 6 gigs per minute, so that might be a reason to buy that 1 terabyte model if that's something you think you need. People that need ProRes know that they do. This is not a feature for the average iPhone user. And let's also take a second to just look at the regular 4K recording. It shoots up to 60 frames per second. Still, this hasn't changed, but it looks really good. It gets sharp, not too sharp, great color. I love the way Smart HDR works. It keeps moving forward and looking better with each iteration. And by the way, if you're the kind of person that might be shooting professional work on your iPhone, I recommend hitting the like button. Guys, that's up for this week, and if you want to find out more, check out some of the channel's videos.